This is me. I'm kind of going to talk about diversity, but really a little bit more about empathy, and about how I've tried to inject a little bit more empathy into how I build products and how I build teams and how my teams think about building their products. So first, a little bit about me. I started my technology career at Crate & Barrel, as most people do. So Crate & Barrel sells housewares. I spent the better part of a decade there building point-of-sale system and a bunch of internal systems. After 7 or 8 years, I got a little bored. So I decided to try to do something a little more fun. So I left there and I joined a place called Threadless. Threadless was awesome. It's a crowdsourced t-shirt company. And I spent a couple years there rebuilding the e-commerce platform and helping build out the team a little bit more. And I had sort of accomplished all the things that I wanted to do. And so I left to try and think about the next thing that made sense. So, I had done housewares for a while, I had done t-shirts for a while, so I did the next logical thing, which was the president. So I spent the better part of 2 years working on the 2012 re-election campaign. I was the director of engineering, and I can talk about the products that we built, but I didn't actually build anything. I built a team. And it was intense, and we learned all kinds of amazing, great things. And then after the election, I didn't have a job. So myself and my good friend Harper, we started our own company called Modest. So that gives you a little background on sort of where we are and who we are. Let's get back to empathy. So what does that mean in terms of building products? It means really, like, at the base level, knowing who you're building for and knowing what their problems are. And actually understanding their problems, but more than that, like valuing their problems as your own. Because if you don't do that, if you just sort of know what the problems are and what you're trying to fix, you end up building products that are fine, which is my favorite epithet to talk about things that are terrible. You talk to people who use these programs that they just absolutely hate, and they're like, oh, everything's wrong with it. And you're like, would you like to switch to something else? And they're like, no, it's fine. So as an industry, we know this. So we do a lot of user research, and we listen to the users, and we talk about what their problems are so that we can define those things, and then we turn them into specs or user stories or whatever you want to do that, and we sort of define and analyze these problems, and we just sterilize the user out of it completely. Then it comes time to build things, and building things is crazy, particularly in a startup. It's just like you have all of the things to build. Cool. So we end up with these incredibly talented, highly trained teams. And still, literally with every single deploy, I have a checklist so that we can remember to do the things that we internally as engineers truly, deeply care about. Like, is there a migration here that we're going to forget and then I'm going to get paged at 2 in the morning? In the end, we have to, like, when things are crazy, we focus on what we feel is important. And so even though intellectually we know that, like, it's important that I don't get paged at 2, and that it's also important that users don't get confused by what we're doing, when it's crunch time, we just focus on the thing that we're actually feeling. And so we end up completely forgetting the user in this place. So instead of actually listening to the users at all levels, we're sort of listening to their words and then turning them into things, but not actually listening to them, listening and feeling their pain as our own. The shorthand for that is we're not really valuing good as a part of done. So we're like, yes, the test passed, so it's done. But we're not actually including, like, is this actually making things better for the user? I'm going to take a quick drink. So, how do I get empathy? I have 3 quick things that I have used and have been used on me to try and inject a little more empathy at sort of the engineering level of how we're doing things. So the first is feel the pain. I mentioned that I worked at Crate & Barrel for quite a long time. I wrote software there. I started out, I came in, I was like 20 years old, and I was like, I'm an engineer, I can solve all your problems, I'm the smartest person in the world. And they were like, oh, that's awesome. Here's what you're going to do. Go work in a store. And I was like, this is a waste of my talent. But the thing is that that's what everybody did. The first thing that everybody that works for that company does is goes and works in a store. so that they can actually feel the pain. They can understand what the people on the floor are experiencing on a daily basis. They can understand what our customers are actually coming in with their problems. I moved on to Threadless. Threadless did the same thing. The first week there, you work in the warehouse, picking and packing shirts. While I was there, we hired a new CEO. His first week, picking and packing shirts. Threadless actually took it one step further, and they had a whole community built around their users. And so everybody that was a part of this organization was expected to be a part of that community, because otherwise you wouldn't be effective at your job. So the Obama campaign, building software for people knocking on doors. So obviously, the first thing we do was not that. We made the exact same mistake that I made when I was 20, which was, as engineers, we're far too valuable to be out knocking on doors. And so some of us did, and I say us, but I should say some of them. I didn't, because I did a bad job. But as a whole team, we didn't embrace that as something that we needed to do, and we built a far worse product because of that. You have to know what you're talking about internally, not just intellectually, like, I understand what this problem is, but like, feel the pain, actually know what the problems are. Second trick is reminders. So those checklists that I talk about, they work really well. They use them everywhere. Pilots use them, doctors use them, where it's like, make sure you're amputating the right leg. Like, people need this so that they can actually remember the things when everything's crazy. The thing is, if you just write it when you're just thinking about the things that you've already internalized as being important, then you're just going to reflect those things. So actually, you need to go back and make sure that, like, when you see it fail, like, oh, we released this and it completely screwed over all of our users, you need to go back and change your checklist to make sure that they actually reflect what your real values are. There's nothing bad about reminding people that constantly. The third thing is just cheat. Empathy is really hard. It's hard to get people to think about other people's pain. And frankly, a monoculture makes it way worse. You end up with, this is where like disdain for the user comes from, where you have a bunch of engineers and you're like, well, I've solved this problem. The user clearly doesn't understand what they're talking about. You're wrong. It ends up building a worse product. So a fun trick to be able to align what's important to the team and what's important to the users is to make the team look like the users. Surprise! It sounds obvious because it is. If you have a really broad audience, then you should have a really broad team. Diversity is a great shortcut to building a better product. So I'm going to do more. Let's talk about teams, because I kind of threw that in there at the end, like, and then all you have to do is just build a great diverse team. That's it. Building teams is also incredibly hard. So the usual path that I've taken when I'm building teams is I think about the problems, and I'm like, okay, well, we have this very clear technical problem, and I think about, who do I know that can solve this problem? Like, who's the expert that can do this? Then I go and I call them, and I say, oh my God, come work with me, it's awesome. And yeah, it seems like a reasonable path. The problem is that I'm just pulling from the same monoculture that is making terrible products. They're solving amazing problems, but not actually building good products. So what I get, I've gotten awesome teams. Like, don't get me wrong, I actually love everybody that I've ever worked with, and like we've built really, really amazing code. They're incredibly smart, but we've had huge deficiencies in the products that we've built because of this. We focus so much on solving the technical problems that we often missed the point of what we were actually trying to do for the user. And really, so many white dudes. It's ridiculous. And you can call that a side effect or not. It's still a problem. And we focused so much on what we thought was the solution that we didn't listen to what was actually needed. So we started Modest, and this was our chance to sort of do whatever we wanted to do. Like, this is our chance to truly own it and either win or fuck it up. So we started out with diversity as a core principle. Like, we needed to have a diverse group of engineers so that at our very core, we're thinking about the different perspectives that our users are going to have. We need to have communication as a part of how we do things, because it's great if you have a diverse team, but if you're not listening to them, it doesn't matter. And then at our very core, making sure that we're actually doing things for the user. In order to make any of that work, we had to change how we work pretty drastically, so that we value solving the user pain and really including like what value you're delivering to the user as a part of done. As engineers, you're trained to just make sure that it works, but the definition of working is left open to interpretation. And so it's like, yes, it satisfies all of the requirements, but if you're not actually putting like deeply what the pain is that you're solving in that requirement set, then you end up with something that's worse. We've had to build a team that focuses on learning and focuses on teaching so that we can actually learn and grow from each other. We've had to drastically shift towards simpler solutions so that we're not thinking about, well, what's the coolest tech that we can put in here, but like, what is the easiest thing that we can do to solve this problem, which opens ourselves up to being able to have a culture that can grow masters and have people who aren't already the experts trying to solve things. The next thing that we had to do with that is change how we hire. The first thing was building an interview process that wasn't hostile. It's amazing to me that our industry builds our entire thing about tricking people and seeing how gotcha we can make it. So we treated that process like a product, and we listened to them, and we tried to iterate on how we can make an interview process that is actually figuring out how we can hire people who can actually communicate, who are actually thinking about the user, who can actually broaden our perspective, who can teach and learn. And then both of those things are cool, but those are functions on an input. And so I had to change my network. I had to change how we found people, because otherwise it's like you have white dudes in and then function and white dudes out. So I had to open it up and find different ideas. I have to find different outlooks, find different people, which is, you have to actively work at doing that. That's my job. My job is to grow my network so that in the end I can build a better team that is talented, that is different, that can actually bring their passion for what the user is feeling to making products better. And that can always fundamentally represent the user across the board, our incredible diverse user base, and fun, so that we can build a better product. That's it. Thanks, everybody.